I think more than the sourcing strategies is when you, or something that it's unique to what I'm working on right now, or unique to Cloud Kitchens back in the days when I was there, is if you don't have the brand recognition. I've worked with big brands as Uber. With Uber, you have a lot of organic applicants, a lot of inbound, and your hiring most likely is going to come from there, or you have different sources of hires. In Cloud Kitchens or here at Capital One, you almost fully rely on outbound sourcing.
Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for more weekly episodes. I'm your host, Lydia, and this week we have Delfina Stabile of Capital One Mexico. Pleasure to have you with us today, Delfina. Good evening.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So tell us about your journey in the talent space of now. Are there specific reasons you're still in it?
Well, my experience started back in Argentina. I'm originally from Argentina, from Buenos Aires. In Buenos Aires, I did more the consulting experience. I worked for 2 different recruiting firms and agencies, doing more high volume and then executive search. And then I moved to Mexico back in 2017 when I started my trajectory on the tech industry and leading recruiting teams. I moved to Mexico for Uber. I ended up spending 5 years at Uber, from which the first 3 I was based out of Mexico leading recruiting teams for Latin America. And then my last 2 years were working for the global recruiting operations team, at first doing more strategy and planning, projects, programs. And then my last role was leading the global employer brand team in San Francisco. Then I left Uber. I joined Cloud Kitchens. I spent 2 years there, had 2 roles, leading the global recruiting team and then leading all of the top of funnel, so employer brand and sourcing global function for the 2 lines of businesses that we had back in the company. And then I'm currently working at Capital One, leading tech recruiting efforts for our tech hub in Mexico. What I would say is like the reason that I joined recruiting and then the reason that I've stayed is I really like building things from scratch, building teams, scaling things. And I would say that's a common denominator out of those 3 experiences. Uber was in expansion. Uber and Uber Eats were in expansion in Latin America back when I joined. Cloud Kitchens was expanding globally, so I had to scale the teams globally. And then Capital One, I had to launch from scratch the tech hub here in Mexico. When I joined, it was like 4 people. Now it's 150 of us. So it's been evolved.
4 to 150. That's a huge one. In what kind of time frame are we talking about here?
I joined 7 months ago, so I would say like roughly like a little bit over 6 months. So yeah, that's what I like. I like scaling, and I like to have aggressive hiring targets and to make sure that I reach those goals. And specifically being really close to the business and a really thoughtful partner to the business for them to reach their goals through its people. That's what keeps me here. And what I do.
What is the sort of mindset that you bring to very demanding? I wouldn't say, in this term, it's very demanding, right? And it's also, there is a challenge to overcome. So what sort of mindset do you bring to roles like this or scopes like this?
I would say I'm very competitive, and I'm really data driven. I really like to have super concrete and like clear goals and work towards those. And what I would say is like I really enjoy building teams and taking my teams to be highly productive, which is not always easy. And it's really different whether you are inheriting a team, whether you are building a team, but like either building or inheriting, and make sure that you build a highly productive team. I think it's what I enjoy the most. I really like leading teams and make sure that you build great culture with healthy competition and with data-driven goals. I think it's a mix of different things to make sure that you get them to that goal, that they also want to get to that goal. I think that's the most important thing. And what I would say I would focus the most on is like setting the vision and making sure that they all want to hit that hiring target and that they all see and know what the goal is, so we can all go to that goal and target together. Basically.
So what are some of the recruitment goals that you're currently focusing on, specifically for tech recruitment within Mexico?
So what we are doing is Capital One is a leading digital banking firm in the US, and we have really aggressive growth goals. And by hiring in the US, we're not going to get to those. So basically, what we had to do is like think of an expansion strategy and more international landscape to make sure that we hit those growth goals. And that's when Mexico came in. Time zone, level of talent, distance. There were a couple components that made Mexico like a great market for us to launch and start investing in its talent. So basically, what we are doing is building a tech hub that it's going to leading and launching products end to end from Mexico for the US.
What sort of sourcing strategies do you find it's most effective when you're hiring specialized talent in Mexico?
Look, like I think more than the sourcing strategies is when you, or something that it's unique to what I'm working on right now, or unique to Cloud Kitchens back in the days when I was there, is if you don't have the brand recognition. I've worked with big brands as Uber. With Uber, you have a lot of organic applicants, a lot of inbound, and your hiring most likely is going to come from there, or you have different sources of hires. In Cloud Kitchens or here at Capital One, you almost fully rely on outbound sourcing. So I think sourcing becomes your bread and butter. You need to do sourcing well. And what I think is really, really important is to have a recruiting function, but also have a sourcing function. You need to have people working on the lead generation, people on driving the qualified leads. So then recruiters can focus more on what they do best, that it's like drive the candidate through, focus on the candidate experience, focus on the closing. So I think what I would say that it's like really unique to what I'm building is like you need to have a sourcing function and you need to have a good ratio between sourcer and recruiter to get to the targets that you need, because it all starts with the top of funnel. If you don't have the top of funnel, then you're never going to get the hires that you need to make. So what I would say is like techniques, there are a bunch of different techniques, different of sourcing platforms. I would say in Mexico, LinkedIn is the main platform that we use. We're trying to be really open on how we do sourcing and go to the whole country and try to find the best talent across the country and then offer them relocations, because we're based in Mexico City, but we're open and we want to proactively target talent in the rest of the country. But what I would say it's key is more than the channels or the platforms or the strategies is that ratio between sourcer and recruiter to make sure that you're getting to the volume that you need to have at top of funnel, and then so they can convert to the actual hires that you need.
So what is the main advantage of splitting that function from sourcer and recruitment?
So if you don't split it, if it would be a different recruiting function, you have different sources of hires, right? You have applicants, you have outbound sourcing, you have referrals, you have internal applicants, you have events, you have a bunch of different sources. When you don't have that, because we're positioning the brand, launching the brand for the first time, we don't have internals yet because we're brand new. We don't have as many referrals because we didn't have as many people in seed. You fully rely on sourcing. So the recruiter doesn't have the time to source the volume and the amount that they have to be sourcing while pushing candidates through the pipeline. So I think by splitting them, you make sure that there's a team fully producing the amount and the volume that you need at top of funnel to get to the hiring targets. And of course, the math that you always have to do is the reverse funnel base. Like you have of course your target, and then you have the pass rates, which when you are starting and you don't have historical data, is a bit more complex. As soon as and get more critical mass in the pipelines, and then you have a historical data, then it's easier to inform the funnel and how many people you will need at top of funnel to get to those targets.
When it comes to technical roles, right? How do you balance that evaluating technical skills while maintaining that sort of ideal candidate experience?
I think technical skills is something you can't be flexible on. Like that's where it all starts. So I would say is like technical skills is the most important thing you need to have, specifically when you have a high bar for talent. Like at Capital One, we do have a high bar for talent, and our process has different technical assessments that are really important. So if someone doesn't have the technical skills, you're not going to pass those assessments. So I think it all starts there. It all starts with like what's tech stack you're looking for, what programming skills you're sourcing for, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it all starts with the sourcing that you make and the quality you put at top of funnel. That's one thing. And that's where recruiter and sourcer work together to make sure that they are well calibrated with the hiring managers to know exactly what is it that they're looking for and sourcing for the right keywords and the right programming skills. And then once you get them throughout the funnel, what I would say is like, for us, candidate experience is really important. Our process is pretty standardized and straightforward. The amount of instances, you know exactly what to expect in each stage. And what I would say that it's the most important for technical talent throughout these processes is prep them really well for the different stages that they're going to have. It's in Mexico, it's not a big practice to have code assessments. We have a big code assessment that it's a big filter for us, even before to get to the interview. So like my recruiters like spend a lot of time prepping candidates on what's going to happen, how much time they will have, how the platform looks like, how can they prep and practice for the assessment. We give them enough time, etc. So that's one thing. And then once we move to the interviews, in which we have a power day of like 40 interviews, from which some are technical and some are not, we over-index on prepping them on the technical ones to make sure that they are well prepared and well equipped, and we are setting them up for success throughout the process. So I would say the most important thing, if you think of candidate experience, is like prepping them well, setting expectations, and making sure you're setting them up for success on those technical instances.
So we're talking about specialized talent, very rare talent to find. So what are some ways recruiters can approach or even manage salary expectations in a very competitive job market?
I would say that Mexico has been booming for the past couple of years, so it is really competitive. And what I would say is like something that is pretty unique to Mexico is like the pay spread, or the spread that we have within pay packet or compensation packages, because we have local companies and then we have foreigner companies but who operate in Mexico, and then US companies hiring remotely fully in US dollars, with people having the advantage of not paying taxes, etc., etc. So what I would say is like what I always tell my recruiters is like they need to be really flexible and first understand what's their current situation, what's the candidate's current situation, and what are the main drivers. Something that I would say that it's different or unique from Mexico from other countries or the US, for example, is like in the US, candidates think total compensation. They really see the value between the mix of cash and equity. They really think annual cash, total cash, no matter if it's sign-in bonus, base salary, target annual bonus. In Mexico, people really care about the monthly liquidity. So they do care about the base salary and the monthly income. So that's something that we also need to take into consideration. So like when it's worth giving someone a sign-in bonus, or when someone is asking for more base salary, and then we're going to go more aggressive there, but then don't compensate with a bonus. So I would say like flexibility and really understanding what is it that the candidate currently has and what's the main driver. Is it cash? Is it the monthly? Is it the annual income? Or is it a mix of cash and equity because they're thinking long-term? So that's where I always try to make sure that like maintaining pay parity, of course, within the engineers in seed, we get flexible and we try to extend offers that fully align to the specific situation that each candidate has.
How do you keep up with the needs of the business? At this point, it's scaling. So once you've reached that point where you've already, pretty much done all the mass hiring that you need to do, how do you keep up with, how do you adapt to the changing needs of the business?
So the needs are constantly changing. So things you can predict and some things that you can't predict. What I always like to have is kind of like a buffer. Like you'll never have a firm number, but like at least having like a ballpark and then knowing and having the right number to play around. So what I would say is there's three things that I would say that I always try to do. One is have the right capacity. You need to have the right team size to hit the targets. And again, get to that capacity based on the historical data and like basically seeing the pass rates and the productivity that your team has had in the past months, et cetera, et cetera. So like adding the capacity is really important, and it's something that I've been focusing on since I've joined the team, and like making sure we get to the right number of recruiters that we need to have. Second thing is activity. Again, when you depend on sourcing, you need to have the right numbers at top of funnel. So the activity that your candidates, that your recruiters are driving is really, really important. Then the third, and not least, which is the most important, is the actual pass rates, the actual productivity or efficiency that you may have throughout the funnel. So I would say we always play around those. You get the capacity, you make sure that you have the right activity levels, and then what I do and what I'm always trying to do is making sure that we're doing everything we can to improve those pass rates and get to that efficiency and productivity, desired productivity.
And how do you see the role of recruiters evolving in the next 5 years or so? Or at least it's already starting to evolve with AI and automation, but how do you foresee the role of recruiters changing or developing in the next 5 years?
So I think for recruiting, and maybe this is a thing from Latin America, we firmly believe on the personal connections. So there's some things that technology can change in the recruiting space, and I think there's some things that can change. What I would say is, like, I think recruiters are becoming more and more tech savvy, more and more like used to using different technologies. When I've been in the recruiting space for a couple of years already, and I didn't have ChatGPT back when I joined. And when I was interviewing for new recruiters these past months, when I would ask them how they would get up to date on the market trends, industry trends, how to source, where to find candidates, they would always mention ChatGPT, which is something that I've never seen before. I think recruiters are really good at like adapting those new technologies to their sourcing strategies, where to find candidates, how to find candidates, what keywords to use, et cetera, et cetera. But if you ask me, I think recruiting is something that like you'll never be able to bypass the human interaction and the human connection. Yes, there's a lot of tools already out there to automate processes, to escalate processes, etc. Like, of course, like in order to scale and in order to grow, you need to have those tools. But at the same time, you need to have a recruiter interacting with the candidate and making sure you have a connection, you really understand the drivers, and you sell the offer. So I would say that the role is constantly changing. There's a lot more technology than there was out there back when I joined the recruiting space. But I think it's more being able to adapt to the new technologies and how to incorporate those in the different parts of the process, either if it's for sourcing, for ATSs or candidate management, employer brand stuff, employee videos, tools. I don't know. There's like a million tools that you can incorporate throughout the sourcing and the recruiting funnel. But I think the recruiter role will always have to be the same. That is establishing that connection with the candidate and then making sure that you get to a closing between what their drivers are and then what you have to offer.
And finally, Delfina, what advice would you give someone who is starting out in the recruitment space today?
What I would say is I think they need to really understand the recruiting funnel. I think once I joined Uber and I understand it was all about the funnel, all about the numbers, it's ultimately a numbers game. So I think that's the main message I would give recruiters is like, yes, of course, it's like establishing the connection, making the interviews, but like recruiting is ultimately a numbers game. I'm a psychologist. Like I do have a soft background, but then when I realized this was a numbers game, it was like, okay, it all goes back to the numbers and the funnel and really understanding and doing the reverse funnel in order to see how you need to get there. So what I would say is like, be curious, always ask questions, learn from your candidates. Like what I always, like now I'm in the tech recruiting space. You hear a lot that tech recruiting is so different. I think if you're a good recruiter, you can be a good recruiter doing tech or non-tech. Yes, tech is really hard, but at the same time, if you're a good recruiter, you can do anything. And there's a million ways in which you can learn about the roles that you have. Tech, non-tech, ask questions. Whenever you find a candidate, ask the questions. Whenever you're in an interview and you're like, this candidate is telling me everything I need to know, ask them questions from them. So there's a lot of things on the recruiting craft that you learn as you go with the candidates that you talk to and the hiring managers that you work with. But I think ultimately it's a numbers game. So knowing that all goes back to the funnel and the numbers, I think it's really, really important. So be data driven.
So thank you so much, Delfina, for your time and your insights. This has been wonderful. For those who are listening in, who might want to pick up a conversation based on what you just shared, where can they get in touch with you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. It should be linkedin.com/Delfina Stabile. And then, if they want to search Capital One Careers, they can go ahead and do so, or it's capital1careers.com/Mexico too.
Thank you again. And we have been in conversation with Delfina Stabile of Capital One Mexico. Thank you for joining us. And remember to subscribe to stay tuned for more weekly episodes from All in Recruitment.